way the Jews work. They are deceivers. They plot. They lie. They do whatever they have to do to accomplish their political agenda. This impeach Trump movement is a Jew coup. And the American people better wake up to it really fast, because this thing is moving now towards a vote in the House and then a trial in the Senate. We could have a trial before Christmas. This country could be in civil war at Christmas time.
Hail Trump! Hail our people! Hail victory!
Judaism teaches racial superiority.
Yes.
That's what they teach.
And they practice it on the Palestinians.
Look, the Talmud is specific to say what Gentiles are, what the cattle do. They are slaves.
Yes.
And we recognize the central lie of American race relations. We don't exploit other groups. We don't gain anything from their presence. They need us and not the other way around.
The Freedom from Religion Foundation, Jewish.
Yes.
ACLU, Jewish. ADL, Jewish. Go down the list. Who attacks Christianity? Right? Right Wing Watch, Jewish. The only reason for Right Wing Watch's existence is to smear Christians.
So the first clip that you guys saw was of Pastor Rick Wiles on his show True News. Rick is the first of many figures that I would like to look at in this ongoing series that I'm going to be working with Godless Cranium on. The series is called The Cycle of Fascism, as a play on the cycle of abuse, wherein a victim cyclically will find themselves in a situation where abuse is levied at them. Likewise, for Cycles of Fascism, we see how nations are constantly faced with the threat of a hyper-nationalistic regime being built from within its own soil. Godless Cranium is going to be looking at many of the attempts throughout history to bring about the ideas of Nazism, fascism, or otherwise toxic ideologies, whereas I'm going to be looking at some of the more modern instances of this. People like Richard Spencer and Rick Wiles, the people who were shown in the clips before. The series is going to take several months of work, but everything is going to be put into a solid playlist for people to view afterwards. The first video in this series has already been done by Godless Cranium, and it'll be linked in the description below. Also, if you haven't subscribed to Godless Cranium already, you really should. He's one of the creators who was a large influence on my channel, and if you haven't subscribed to him already, he's definitely worth a watch. Alright, with that said, let's get back to Rick. Rick Wiles is a non-denominational senior pastor at Flowing Streams Church in Vero Beach, Florida. He is also a radio host and the founder of the True News website. It's also the name of his internet radio series. So why are we talking about Rick, and why is any of this relevant? Well, if you guys remember, when I made my video on whether or not Nazis were socialists, I pointed out that there was a bit of a problem, here in the States at least, where sympathizers to at least anti-Semitic, but in some cases outright Nazi-esque ideologies have been cropping up here and there in the States for the last few years. While it's not very hard for us to label someone like Richard Spencer a Nazi, I mean, heck, the guy's even gotten punched for it, it may be harder to label this senior old pastor a Nazi as well. There can be argument about whether or not applying that label so fast and loose is a problem, and some may think that applying it to somebody like Rick Wiles is diminishing its value. In light of that, I'll let you guys decide in the comment section below whether or not you think the label correctly applies to him as we do our study on him. So for a little bit of history, before he became a radio host, Wiles was a media, marketing, and advertising sales manager. He worked as a manager in advertisement for channels like CNN and ESPN in the early 1980s. He was then hired in 1984 by the Christian Broadcasting Network. It was here that he became the first national cable marketing manager. Later on, though, in 1995, he was hired as the marketing director for the Trinity Broadcast Network. Trinity, for what it's worth, is the largest religious television network that has ever seen TV. This is all to say that, if anything, Rick has a lot of experience with television marketing. He's also had several collaborations with Jim Bakker. For those who don't know, Jim Bakker is the televangelist that constantly warns about the apocalypse happening and tries to sell you giant buckets of mac and cheese so that you can survive the coming tribulation. Anywho, back to Rick. So he founded the True News organization in 1998 in Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas, as a Christian ministry. It should also be noted that this is the same year that he wrote Judgment Day 2000. The book was a sensationalized piece talking about how the collapse of the computing industry during the Y2K phenomenon of the year 2000 would bring about a type of apocalypse, and his book was an attempt to try to make a bit of a survival guide for that. What we can glean from this is that much like Jim Baker, he likes profiting off of people's hysteria. Much like the hysteria of post-apocalyptia has sold many of Jim Baker's buckets of non-perishable food items, so too has Rick historically attempted to capitalize on the hysteria of people around him for profit. But there's a very particular type of hysteria that we want to focus on today. If you notice from the clips that I gave earlier, he seems to have a huge problem with Jews, thinking that they control every avenue of media and that they are constantly trying to persecute Christians.
How many times I hear Jewish comics on television mocking my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ? How about Bill Maher? How many anti-Christian, bigoted statements has Bill Maher made on HBO? Just think of the Jewish comics that lambast and just denigrate Jesus Christ, Christianity, morality, and they're Jewish comics. How many Jewish produced TV shows mock Christianity?
And to that you might answer that, well, he's obviously a bigot. He's got an issue with Jews, and that's a problem. But where does this actually lead? What does he actually do with his rhetoric that's harmful? Well, remember the clip at the very beginning of this video. When talk of the impeachment was going on, what's the first thing that Rick Wiles thought this was? He thought that this was a Jew coup. This was a coup by a Jewish conglomerate to get rid of President Donald Trump. And to what end? Well, let's find out.
In the Senate, we could have a trial before Christmas. This country could be in civil war at Christmas time.
Now, bear in mind that removing a president from office is something we've done before, and legally. We've done the impeachment process on President Nixon, so this is nothing new. When people in America are not happy with their president, then they will generally try to do something about it. After all, this is supposed to be one of the benefits of a democracy. If you don't like your leaders, there are legal mechanisms for removing them. But what does Rick think will happen if Trump is actually impeached? What will happen to our nation? Remember, this is the same guy who profited off of the sensationalism around Y2K. This is the guy who's worked with Jim Baker. This guy has also previously been, as I covered, a marketing manager. He knows how to make an audience do what he wants. That has been his job for decades.
If they take him out, there's going to be violence in America. That's all there is to it.
And when we say take him out,
however he leaves, there's going to be violence in America. And I believe there are people in this country, veterans, there are cowboys, mountain men, guys that know how to fight. Okay? And they're going to make a decision that the people that did this to Donald Trump are not going to get away with it. And they're going to hunt him down. I'm serious. They're going to hunt him down.
Rick Wiles is convinced, or at the very least, he wants you to be convinced, that if we do impeach Donald Trump, there's going to be a civil war in America, and the people who are going to be on the side of Trump in the civil war are the ones who know how to fight. Let's take a look at this from the perspective of someone in marketing. A common rule in marketing and media is that negative media sells. People may want to hear positive stories, or at least say they do, but the thing that actually sells the papers is almost always going to be negative media. People just like conflict. It's also the reason why response videos on my channel perform better than videos like this. For some reason, people enjoy the negative. People enjoy the conflict. That's where the money is. So let's say you had two goals as a marketer. Your first goal is to pander to your audience. You know that your audience is a right-wing Christian one, so the likelihood that they support Donald Trump is very high. We know that this conservative right audience also values things like masculinity in a very high regard, almost to a toxic sense. So what do? Well, you celebrate those things. You celebrate the fact that they know how to fight, ignoring the negatives that these are people who obviously can't solve their problems with words or via democracy and would rather solve it by violence. Whereas, from his point of view, the best way to frame these people is that they're the chivalrous ones that are going to fight for the loss of their Donald Trump, whereas from my point of view, the best way to frame them would be that these are the barbarous thugs that can't solve their problems with words in their minds and have to resort to their meat fists. From a marketing perspective, you would want to celebrate these people. You would also want to sensationalize the impeachment of the person that they like. But because you are a marketing manager, because this has been your job, you also know that you don't just have to pander to the audience you know you've already gotten to buy your shit. You also need to send a message to people who don't agree with you. So what's the best way to do that? Well, in this case, if your goal is to try to keep Trump in power, then levying a threat to the people who would try to usurp his power would seem to be the best thing to do. You incentivize your right-wing audience to keep watching you, and you de-incentivize your left-wing audience from doing the thing that's going to hurt your right-wing audience. How do you do this? Well, you point out that there's going to be a huge threat of violence if they do impeach the president. Remember, though, that impeachment, as I said before, is a legal process. We have avenues to make this process happen. It's there for a reason. Again, we did this during Watergate with then-President Nixon. This isn't unprecedented. This is just what happens when a large enough population in your nation doesn't like your president or thinks they have done something wrong. It happened with Nixon, and it's happening now. But what type of mentality do you have to threaten people trying to use the legal systems in one's country to remove a leader? Well, there is one type of government that is hyper-nationalistic and would do everything in its power to maintain the position of the person at the highest head of their office. I know you're probably already typing out in the comment section that it's not this, but that is the idea that leads to fascism. In the book The Anatomy of Fascism, Robert Paxton lays out a definition that we can use for this. Fascism may be defined as a form of political behavior marked by obsessive preoccupation with community decline, humiliation, or victimhood, and by compensatory cults of unity, energy, and purity, in which mass-based party of committed nationalist militants, working in uneasy but effective collaboration with traditional elites, abandons democratic liberties, and pursues with redemptive violence, and without ethical or legal restraints, the goals of internal cleansing and external expansion.
And yes, together, we will make America great again.
Now, I don't have time in this video, since it is focused on Rick, to go into all of the ways in which Donald Trump utilizes fascist ideology in order to gain political power, or at least recognition, but that will be an episode in the future in this series. I wanted to lay out that definition of fascism so that we could use it as a working one going forward. The obsessive preoccupation with community decline, leading to a need to make America great again, or as people like Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder would say, the declination of Western civilization. These obsessive tendencies about culture lead to the types of hypernationalism that birth fascistic regimes. And before somebody tries to say that America's not a fascist nation, I know that. I'm well aware that we are not a fascist nation, but I'm also well aware that history tends to repeat itself. It's also no secret that regimes such as what we saw in Mussolini's Italy or Nazi Germany, that these things don't spring up overnight, or sometimes even in a handful of years. They take time. But when you can recognize that these things are happening, you are better equipped to fight against them. So what other ways have we actually seen Rick Wiles try to sensationalize what the Jews, or really anybody, is doing in his country? Well, there is this bit.
We'll see the Jewish lobby being the strongest proponent of red flag laws in America. Their henchmen in Congress will be fanning out across America on TV shows and town hall meetings promoting red flag laws. This is about confiscation of guns.
So not only does Rick think that the Jews are in control of all of the media and constantly persecuting Christians, he also thinks that they're trying to lead a coup against Trump, and that one of the mechanisms they're going to use in an effort to gain power in the country is to remove guns from its citizens, specifically through the liberal application of red flag laws. He's also been a very vocal supporter of Donald Trump and thinks that the removal of Trump will lead to the moral decline of the nation and moving it into civil war. He thinks that mountain men and veterans are going to come up in defense of Trump after being removed and fight for the nation that they've lost, because apparently the president was the only thing that was important in the nation. So we have a clear us versus them narrative. The them are the left and the Jews. The us are the right and Donald Trump. This isn't terribly far off from the type of mentality that would have supported Hitler's Germany. But much like with what we saw in Hitler's Germany, there are some fairly inconsistent views being spat out here. First of all, he's against red flag laws and thinks they're going to be used in an attempt to seize power in the nation against Donald Trump. But what does Donald Trump think about red flag laws?
We must make sure that those judged to pose a grave risk to public safety do not have access to firearms, and that if they do, those firearms can be taken through rapid due process. That is why I have called for red flag laws, also known as extreme risk protection orders.
Oh. Well, that's kind of awkward. But these are the types of inconsistencies that you could expect from somebody like Rick, who, like a marketing manager, and unlike somebody legitimately trying to support his own positions, is trying to say the things that he thinks people want to hear, as opposed to the beliefs that are truly his. He knows he's pandering to people who like the fascistic ideals when he talks about Jew coups and red flag laws and civil wars breaking out because of due process doing its thing. But if any of those things are supported by the people who he's trying to argue for, that's the information that's going to be swept under the rug. Because what matters isn't what's true to somebody like Rick. What matters is whether or not he can thoroughly sensationalize something and then feed it to his audience, much like he did when the Ebola virus was starting to gain prominence again.
This Ebola epidemic could become a global pandemic, and that's another name for plague. It may be the great attitude adjustment that I believe is coming. Ebola could solve America's problems with atheism, homosexuality, sexual promiscuity, pornography, and abortion. If Ebola becomes a global plague, you better make sure the blood of Jesus is upon you. You better make sure you've been marked by the angels so that you're protected by God. If not, you may be a candidate to meet the Grim Reaper.
So what we have so far is somebody who's willing to threaten violence against people who are using democratic due process, has a rabid fascination with Jews infiltrating everything, thinks they're trying to stage a coup against his favorite president, and then tries to argue that the Jews are going to get all of your guns confiscated. At the same time, he thinks that God is willing to wipe all of these people out, atheists and homosexuals included, through the use of the Ebola virus, and that this is a good thing. Unless, of course, you're a Christian, wherein he leaves that final message: if you convert and you put the blood of Jesus on you, then you won't be having a visit from the Grim Reaper. This is convert or die mentality. This is the mentality of someone who would have been a staunch defender of the Spanish Inquisition. As long as it's his side doing the oppressing to other people, it doesn't matter what types of damages those people suffer. He goes so far as to call a disease wiping out people in the world as an attitude adjustment. He celebrates violent people who can't communicate with words and have to communicate with guns and fists, as long as those guns and fists are aimed at leftists and Jews, people who he despises. Christians in my audience, is this somebody who shares your mentality or your beliefs? Is this somebody who you can champion? Or is this a marketing manager capitalizing on the gullibility of a nation that is majority Christian? Let me know in the comments section below. And when we're talking about that disease, I know that some of you in my audience might be thinking that he doesn't think there's an actual spiritual connection to the disease, that maybe he's just being metaphorical, but I assure you that's not the case.
Now, is there a spiritual parallel to that religion and the sudden appearance of Zika virus in the Americas? They're getting what they asked for, death.
In this instance, Rick isn't talking about Jews specifically, but another religion that just so happens to not be his favorite flavor of Christianity. He legitimately thinks that someone like Donald Trump is ordained by God. An attack against Trump is an attack on God in his eyes, and he views that this God will gladly hand down punishments via disease or civil war to people who oppose Trump, and therefore God. In his eyes, Trump isn't just his favorite president, it's his favorite prophet. And if you don't believe me on that one, he literally has an episode of his podcast titled Render to God and Trump, the Evangelical Obligation to Defend the President. To someone like Rick Wiles, Trump is ordained by God, and any attacks against him, through impeachment or otherwise, are attacks against his God. Or, at the very least, that's the message that he's spreading. Again, I leave it to you guys to decide whether or not these are his truly held beliefs, or if he's just playing the role of a marketing manager and selling his snake oil to an incredibly gullible audience. Or perhaps it's both. I know that this piece may have seemed a little bit scatterbrained, but there's a lot of stuff on Rick Wiles as he's been on the air for more than a decade. So I wanted to mainly focus on some examples of his anti-Semitism, his sensationalism, and his support for Trump, while noting that many of these things fall from a fascistic ideology that he, at the very least, markets, but might also hold. We've gone over his opinions, we've gone over a little bit of his history, and now I guess we try to figure out what we've learned from all this. I'll leave it to you guys in the comment section to let me know what you've learned, but what I've learned through researching this episode is that there's an incredibly scary section of the Christian right that seems to be trying everything it can do to maintain the power that it has, if not expand it further. And it will do this through threats of hell, through threats of violence, and through threats of opposition from Jews and other religions. The rhetoric that is endorsed and birthed by ideologies such as this is toxic. It's marketing manipulation and it's propaganda. This is the type of stuff that, if consumed constantly by someone who is more than a little gullible, could, in theory, over time, radicalize them. How many steps is it from viewer of Rick's content to subject of Rick's content, where the viewer may idolize the veteran or the mountain man who's fighting for Donald Trump through constant consumption of this media without at least a lens of skepticism? I'm at least a little convinced that enough people could be radicalized to become those mountain men, those fighters, those people willing to resort to violence because democratic due process did what it does best, letting the people's voices be heard. So with that said, if you enjoyed the video, let me know. Subscribe if you haven't already, and please check out Godless Cranium's video, wherein he goes over the Bund organization in early American history and its support of the Nazi regime. Hopefully you guys will enjoy this collaborative project, and if you do, then why not check out either of our Patreons? But that's enough shameless plugs from me. I hope you guys enjoyed, and as always everyone, insert end of video tagline here.